revocable living trust something everyone needs?
Not necessarily. It really depends on your situation and the state that you live in. I think a lot of people assume that a revocable living trust is a must-have, but they're not always necessary. They don't save you money on taxes, which is a common misconception. I listened to a wealth and law podcast where the attorneys based in Arizona, and they talk about a lot of different advanced planning techniques, and it's a great podcast. And they really feel like that everyone should have a revocable living trust, and it's like the basic cornerstone document of an estate plan. But then they have guests who practice in other states where they say, well, it's not really necessary for everybody. So I think like a lot of the stuff, it depends. So they don't save you money on taxes, which is a common misconception.
So it doesn't save on taxes. When does it make sense to have one?
So there's a couple reasons people use revocable living trusts. First, when you have a will, it gets probated, and there's a probate process in each state. And one part of that probate process is that it becomes public record. So if you have a will and you are a celebrity or famous for something and have a lot, like everybody can ultimately see who you leave everything to. Right. So for people who are in that situation or who really value their privacy, maybe having the bulk of their stuff in a revocable living trust will give them that privacy issue. But also, it can own all kinds of different things and make it easier to manage your affairs. And especially, if you become old or sick and it gets hard for you to manage your affairs, you could have your successor trustee step in and manage things on your behalf. And the successor trustee can manage things on your behalf easier in most jurisdictions and in most circumstances than they could if they were your power of attorney. So, you could see where it starts to make more sense in situations.
That makes sense. I know you used to feel pretty strongly that these trusts were only useful if someone could transfer everything they own into the trust. Has your perspective changed on that?
Yeah, it really has. I used to say don't bother unless you can get everything in there because you're still going to have probate. But most people either couldn't or wouldn't do that. Now I've come around a bit. Like even if you don't put everything into the trust, having some assets like your checking account or investments in there can still make a difference, right? So it's not, I no longer think of it as a fail if you don't get everything in there. Because what'll happen, right, is even if you get everything in there, then your car gets old or dies and you go buy a new car and you're like, oh, I bought it with this account or I got a loan or something. It's not my revocable living trust. You have an asset that's outside. But what I'd say is, don't let that hamper a good plan. If it really makes sense for you to use a revocable living trust, then use it. Do your best to transfer assets into it. And then, if something falls out, don't think of it as like a total fail.
Can you explain why it's helpful?
Sure, sure. I mean, the big part is what we just said is like if whatever assets are in your trust, the trustee can act more easily compared to just using a power of attorney. It streamlines things, especially as they get older and managing finances become harder. A trust can offer a smoother path for whoever's stepping in to help.
What about when someone passes away? Does the trust help avoid probate?
Yeah, assets in the trust pass outside of the probate process, just like your IRA would, and which can be helpful. That said, in states like PA and New Jersey, probate isn't always that big of a hassle, so it may not be a huge benefit for everyone. Again, maybe it matters how much you have and how like far flung those things are. If you have 10 accounts of investments and checking and you have all kinds of different things and your executor is going to have to go and take care of all those things through the probate process. Well, maybe having those, maybe you doing the work to put them in your revocable living trust would save your son or daughter trustee a lot of time and work.
So it sounds like even putting a few key accounts in a trust and naming a backup trustee could be worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be everything. Just having some of your core accounts in there can really help if someone needs to step in and manage things later in life. It's interesting as you for me anyway, as I get older and more experienced, so much less stuff is black and white. A lot of stuff is nuanced, right? It's easier to see that the trust, if that works for you for other reasons, you don't get everything in there, that's okay, right? You could deal with it. Well, or your executor and trustee can deal with it.